And anybody familiar with the latest ISO 9001:2015 standard knows that a lot of it, the standard that is, or your QMS, depends on people, their knowledge, their training, and so forth. So what many people don't know is that there is a, wait for it, an ISO guideline.
There you go, imagine that.
Of course, that deals with the framework of how you develop and maintain competent people. It's called ISO 10018, that's 10018, and its title, the title of the standard is, or the guideline is Quality Management Guidelines on People Involvement and Competence, which kind of says it all.
Yep.
But let me read you, just to really drive it home, let me read you part of the introduction of ISO 10018. Quote, "The overall performance of a quality management system and its processes ultimately depends on the involvement of competent people and whether they are properly introduced and integrated into the organization. The involvement of people is important in order for an organization's quality management system to achieve outcomes which are consistent and aligned with their strategies and values. It is critical to identify, develop, and evaluate the knowledge, skills, behavior, and work environment required for the effective involvement of people with the necessary competence." End quote. That's from the intro to ISO 10018. So,
yep.
Yeah, kind of makes sense, right?
It does, yep.
All right. Well, here to tell us a little bit more about ISO 10018 is Bruce Bolger, founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance and co-founder of the International Center for Enterprise Engagement ISO 10018 certification program. Hi, Bruce. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, or good morning your time, folks.
All right. Hey, so I probably bungled a lot of that, but so if you can tell us from an expert's point of view, what is, in general terms, what is ISO 10018 all about?
Yes, it's just as you were actually well explaining, Dirk. It's applying a system to people management in the same way that ISO 9000, I should say, applied a system to process management. So what they've looked at is the need to have a culture, leadership, communication and coaching, communication, I should say, feedback, community. So they've taken rewards and recognition, analytics. They've taken all these components and said, you've got to have agreed upon nomenclature, goals, scope, culture, and a process.
And Bruce, maybe you can explain a little bit further about this, how it ties in with ISO 9001 and other ISO management system standards.
Yeah, it's really an outgrowth in many ways from NXSL, which is a management system that now 16 different standards, including 9001, have to use. These are all requirements, by the way. These are not, these are things that organizations have to do if they want to have the certification, or if they at least want to practice the standards, whether or not they get the certification. And the idea is that they dictate how they define that, okay, we have to have a clear culture of quality. Define that. What does that mean? What are our objectives? We have to make sure all of our leadership is trained in it, and that means our frontline leadership. We have to have a means of coaching them, assessing them. We have to assess engagement. We have to have a formal plan for communicating our quality standards, for making sure people are trained in them, to create a community around them, like a blog or things like that. And then rewards and recognition, analytics, and so in other words, the idea is that you cannot make quality happen without engaging people, and people are complicated. Carrots aren't enough. Information isn't enough. Learning isn't enough. Great leadership isn't enough. ISO has figured out.
Okay, and so what would you say would be maybe some key provisions of ISO 10018 that maybe people aren't familiar with? Maybe they're kind of familiar with ISO 9001, what it says, but what might they find different or surprising about 10018?
Well, the focus on people, and I think if you're an engineer or you're very process-oriented, it's easy to just gloss over clauses 4.12 and the clauses around 7, clauses of 5. But I think what's really important is the connection of interest. They call it interested parties or stakeholders. So the number one thing is always thinking about people. how are people going to affect every single thing we're going to do? And it's not just our employees. That's why we call it enterprise engagement. And ISO refers to stakeholders and interested parties, because interested parties include consumers, distribution partners, sales and non-sales employees, vendors. So I think the number one thing is looking holistically at the people that can affect outcomes. And then secondly, looking at the tools. Companies have terrible silos, and quality managers back in the 90s had to break down those silos to connect the dots. I think ISO standards, many people would agree, it's all about connecting the dots. Well, there are terrible silos in engagement between training, communications, marketing, rewards and recognition. These are at big companies often people that don't even barely talk to one another. So the biggest challenge will be for the quality executive to do what he or she had to do with quality processes, and that is bring together the heads of all the groups, including marketing, finance, operations, to agree upon an overall culture quality vision from which everything has to cascade.
And Bruce, as we wrap this up, do you see ISO 10018 as a standalone, or is it best used as part of a QMS in the same way that ISO 9001 is?
I think that ISO 9001 already requires requires everything's voluntary, but it already has all of the essential frameworks of 10018. So 10018 I view as a toolkit to do, and that's what it was designed to do. We've interviewed and spoken to the founders, and they intended it to be a toolkit to flesh out a process that's only touched upon in clauses 4, 5, and 7, and I believe 8. So what they did was they pulled out all of the people components of QMS, and they put it into a separate standard that they believed could be applied to any type of organization. So it was intended to be for non-manufacturing companies, and it was intended to provide guidance for any organization following the NXSL management system, which is about 16 different standards, so that they can do the same thing. They don't have to do the same thing for multiple standards. They build that system into their organization, and that satisfies all of the criteria for the other standards.
Okay, perfect. Well, you know, if our viewers today are interested in learning more about this topic, Quality Digest and the EEA and the International Center for Enterprise Engagement are presenting a webinar called ISO 9001 and ISO 10018, Developing People Engagement in a QMS. The webinar happens on Tuesday, March 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Ron McKinley of the International Center for Enterprise Engagement will be your presenter, and I'll be hosting. So keep your eyes open in your email inbox for information about how you can register. And Bruce, thanks for joining us this morning. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate that.